Now, the ANC has warned that banks who are found to have manipulated the currency, that they will be charged with economic sabotage. It comes after Standard Chartered admitted to manipulating currency trading in South Africa and agreed to pay what many call a slap on the wrist, a 42.7 million rand penalty. That agreed settlement came at the end of an 8-year probe by the Competition Commissions into the bank's participation in alleged cartel to manipulate the value of the rand. The minister in the Presidency, Khumbudzo Ntshavheni, accusing the private sector of trying to collapse government. If you missed that post-cabinet briefing, take a listen to what she had to say.
On the Standard and Charter confessing to collusion, it's a very sad state. We have maintained over the period that the performance of the rand and sometimes the performance of the economy has been manipulated by private sector who has no interest in the development of this country, who continue to engineer and do machination to make sure that the government collapses. That's why they also self-feed in the narrative that there's a collapsing state, there's a collapsing economy, because that's what they wish for and their actions do that.
Well, Minister in the Presidency, Khumbudzo Ntshavheni, joins us this morning. Minister, it's great to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for coming on. As I'm sure you know, there's been quite a lot of strong reaction to what you had to say about this particular issue in the post-cabinet briefing. Given all of that, given the reaction, which I'm sure you've seen, do you still stand by what you said?
I think the important part is that we have a tendency of doing selective coaching. And we want to then generalize. And so for the first part is that the financial sector, in particular the banks and financial institutions, have confessed to, and it's not one bank, ABSA also confessed to collusion. Standard Charter have availed themselves to then testify in terms of what they've done to manipulate the rand. And if you go back to 2015, you'll recall the state of where our economy was, and it was said it was because of poor governance, it was all those things. And they said the rand was reacting to mismanagement. Mm-hmm. And the rand was not reacting to mismanagement. The rand was being manipulated by 28 financial institutions, including banks. And then we blamed it on government, and that's the tendency. But what you forget, and what we have excluded in the quotation, we've also excluded acknowledgement of the partnership of very patriotic South African businesses who have worked with government and continues to work with government to resolve the challenges facing us. Yes, there's a component in the business sector who do not support government, and we've given, even the first statement, we acknowledge the role that the business in the agricultural sector, as a wine and the Agricultural Business Council, came out when the media wanted to distort the agri-BE quotas as another failure of government to build an inclusive economy. And they came out without government saying so. They came out and clarified that it's not true, you are distorting this thing. We've been working with government on the same BE charter for an inclusive economy. But also we've got business that we work with in the, whether it's NICOM, the energy crisis resolution, whether it's the national logistics crisis resolution, and we're working with them also on fighting crime, and they've been contributing very well. But to go out and select a certain portion because it fits a narrative of those who hold the pen, it's very pity. It's a shame, and also it wants to destroy this country and the partnership this government has established with business. But as it relates to those banks and the financial institutions that have colluded to manipulate the rand, to destroy the rand to the level that the rand today is not performing very strongly like the other people who went out and made statements that collapsed the rand earlier in the year.
Yeah.
We cannot sit by and not consequences, but we must also acknowledge the role and contribution of the business sector who are committed to building the country. Yeah. It doesn't mean that all businesses support the initiatives to build the country. There are those who have gone out and say, we are going to fight this government, we are going to make sure they don't survive. There are statements that have been said again, unfortunately, from the financial sector.
Yeah, and I think Business Unity South Africa echoing exactly what you're saying when it responded to the statements you made on Monday, effectively saying, I thought that we were actually on a good footing with government. Take a listen to what Cass Kuvari had to say.
we are working with government, and we've raised funds to actually donate capacity to government and expertise to government to do some of the stuff that government needs to do. So I don't know. I think the comments by the minister are extremely unfortunate. I hope that she will perhaps clarify them, but from what I've seen, we've just got to say quite clearly that it's far from the case. In fact, our partnership with government since we first met with the President Ramaphosa in April this year has been better than the partnership we've had with government before. So it's far from the facts, and it's a very, very unfortunate statement.
Minister, you say that perhaps the context is missing in what you had to say when we played that soundbite just a moment ago. But it does appear, context or not, that there is some level of antagonizing that the private sector is now feeling, certainly from some quarters. And that's not what we want, right? We don't want an antagonistic relationship between the private sector and government when that relationship can potentially achieve so much.
Actually, and I appreciate what the Business Unity South Africa and the business that are in partnership with government did yesterday when they read the headline from one of the newspapers. They didn't just go out and criticize. They reached out to me to say, Minister, what's this thing? And I've explained the context, and we are going out to also clarify that publicly, not only in your platform, but also to the very paper that started to carry that headline news. But we engaged and we clarified the position. We clarified what we said. And because it's that relationship, because the tendency of wanting to generalize, and unfortunately, it falls in a particular media grouping that has decided that they are going to distort whatever to make sure that the government is seen as anti or anti-business. And it cannot be happen. We will not allow it to happen. We have a solid relationship as a Business Unity South Africa is saying with the Business Leadership South Africa and other components of business. We engage continuously. We have feedback meetings. I participate in the communication stream that we work together to make sure we have similar messaging across the country and internationally. And that's the solidness of the partnership that we've been working on.
Yeah. But
the things that have been done wrong by the financial sectors, they cannot be condoned. And we again, I must reiterate our appreciation to the agricultural sector, SAY, Agribiz, for coming out, and when there was another attempt last week to say Agri-BEE codes are being used to block participation of whites, you need only blacks to participate in exports to the European market. And they came out and said, it's not true, you have not verified the facts. What is in the requirements, they've always been in the requirements, and it's part of the transformation that we have agreed on, and you don't need to have solely a black business or a black business partner to export. We have been exporting, but it's part of the transformation quotas that we have. And for me, it's important that such business people must be acknowledged for their contribution. And if you go to the very media briefing and you go to the clip, we even said that indicates that they are inspired by working together and stronger together in line with the Springboks have led us to do. But you have chosen to go to the negative selection of the statement and not go to the positive selection. And that's what we must, as media, we must be cautious of, because inadvertently we find ourselves causing divisions in the country because we selectively quote what we think will make headline news instead of quoting the full statements and also contrasting the messaging that's in the statement.
Yeah. Look, Minister, there's a lot of reaction, obviously, to what you had to say. And I would like to think that having had your full statement on that post-cabinet briefing, that we do have that context, right? The Progressive Professionals Forum, for example, as well, have also talked about the untold damage that banks did during this time to the country's economy. They've called for corruption in the private sector to be exposed in all of its forms, as we call for corruption in government as well to be exposed in all its forms, right? Both things can be true at the same time. But it does sound, at least looking at the reaction to those comments, that this is the worst form of scapegoating, that government has done quite a lot of damage insofar as certain policies are concerned, that we're struggling heavily in our health sector, in our education system, and yet now we're trying to scapegoat. Is that the case here? Is it a case of scapegoating? Busi Mavuso seems to think so. Take a listen to what she has to say.
The minister's comments and claims are absolutely ludicrous. The government doesn't need our help in running this country down. They are doing a very good job of that on their own. And this is as a result of their own incapability, of their own incompetence, of the system of cadre deployment that we've been lamenting on for quite some time now. You know, if she claims that the failures of South Africa because of the private sector, then I guess we are responsible for the failure in education and the failure in healthcare and the failure of municipalities. City of Joburg having had 8 mayors in the last 2 years. You know, the failure of transport and logistics, the load shedding that we are currently all battling as a country, the water crisis, the fact that you've got thieves masquerading as government officials, and the list goes on.
Minister, the worst case of the pot and the kettle? What's your response here?
I think I better ignore Busi Mavuso, and I think in terms of business, we'll stick with the comments made by Kes Kovadia, and she's not worth responding to. And what I need to explain is that there is no scapegoating. In 2015, 28 financial institutions led by banks manipulated the rand and engineered a collapse or an attempt to collapse the South African economy. 8 years later, the investigations have not been concluded because they are not cooperating. So far, out of the 28 institutions, we've got 2 institutions that have come out, which is ABSA and Standard & Chartered. And we cannot prosecute because the banks are not, and the financial institutions are not cooperating. If it was a government institution, there would have been court orders, there would have been NGOs getting to court to force a quicker movement. There would be naming of who were the CEOs of those institutions and who were those in those meetings. But it has not happened. Why? Because we do not want to acknowledge. And in terms of what we call limitations in government, I think we need to also go back and be realistic. And yesterday we had a debate in Parliament around the census, what we call the executive statement on the census. And we're implicating that in 1990s, compared to South Africa of 1994, 1996, and 1990 to South Africa of 2022, for the majority of the poor, South Africa is a better place. And it's better because there's been improvement in access to healthcare. Even with the load shedding, everybody has access to electricity. And the government has gone from 1990, from early 2000, we have accepted that if we had heeded the call from ESCOM when they said invest in the infrastructure, we would have not been in the position that we are in. But we can't reverse the hand of time. But we can only deal with the situation as it confronts us, and we are busy resolving the load shedding crisis. The Minister of Electricity continues to brief the nation and update the nation on the situation. Between me and you, if we are honest, we will acknowledge that the stages of load shedding have subsided, and there's confidence that by next year we'll start to realize minimal to no load shedding. We've had weeks and weekends where there have not been load shedding. And because there are efforts to resolve the load shedding challenge, and that effort is not being done by anybody else but by the very government that we are accused of. And we've done the acknowledgement. Even with 62 million people that we are servicing, access to water is almost at universal level. And by the way, if load shedding is over and done with, 95% of South Africans will have access to electricity. There's only one municipality that is sitting at just over 80% of access to municipality in the country. Who has achieved that? The very ANC government.
Minister,
who has achieved that?
Can I come in there? Because it's ironic that you talk about load shedding and access to electricity. Just this morning at 2 o'clock in the morning, ESCOM announced stage 4. So for the foreseeable future, 10 hours without power is what we're facing. Insofar as water challenges is concerned, large parts of the country without water for not days, not weeks, months, some of them years, Minister. As I said to you, a number of things can be true. But I think Busi Mavuso, who also, by the way, represents some of the largest corporations in the country, you say she's not worth responding to. Surely on that basis she's worth responding to. She's also echoing the sentiments of many South Africans who are buckling under the pressures that we're facing in our country. Our hospitals even have to cancel surgeries because of water shortages. Please do respond, Minister, whether you think it's worthwhile or not.
No, I'm not responding to Busi. I'm responding to the challenges facing the country and the efforts government is making to resolve those challenges. And if you had not interrupted us, maybe the load shedding question would have been gone. As Minister Ramokgopa has indicated in the media briefing on Sunday, that you are going to have an increase because they are ramping up the maintenance program. Because now as companies slow down, it's an opportunity for us to ramp up the maintenance program so that we've got the fleet available when we go into the winter period. Because it's only now when your demand for electricity from industry that use it for manufacturing is lower or is getting lower, that they can ramp down the maintenance. Why they ramped up the maintenance, Why they do that is so that the fleet can be available because they then can take out plan for a longer period. We have had, as Minister Ramokgopa said, we've had a 30,000 megawatt energy factor availability in this period. So in that period, you must make sure that your fleet can be maintained and be ready. It's like your own vehicle. If you take your car for service, you do a major service for the car on the day that you do not need the vehicle, and a minor service on the day that you think for 2 hours the car can be up, you don't have use of it, and then you can take it later. And that's what we are doing. So, and that's the explanation that has been given by Minister Ramokgopa, that we are ramping up maintenance. So that we can then have electricity during the time the fleet can be in peak performance during the time when we all need electricity, and that's the explanation given. We had Quebec unit 1 back onto the grid, I think a day or so, or yesterday or day before. They've come back on the grid, and it was taken out for the longest period to make sure that the maintenance is done thoroughly and it can be ready and stay for the long haul. And that's one. And we've admitted the mistakes that have been done with load shedding, and we said we're on the corrective path. So we can continue to harp on the mistakes, but for me what's important is how do we correct and move on. Equally in the provision of water, there have been areas that they have not been, because what we have done as government is that when the country was developing and the sizes were moving, and if you want to measure, more especially access to water and access to electricity, the pace at which we electrified and reticulated water was meeting the pace of development, and matched that with people who have moved into formal housing in the country and the decline of informal housing, meaning everybody who was in informal housing or informal settlements, including traditional housing, where they did not use electricity. Now they're using electricity, they're using piped water. But we did not match that with the pace and the capacity. And the Minister of Water Affairs, and he continues to brief. There's a debate in another platform they're holding. We'll have to bring them into your platform and the Deputy Minister to come and explain the program to make sure that all areas that did not have water now have water. We can talk about, remember the Umzimvubu Dam, which was spoken about forever and ever, and there was no movement. Now construction is starting in the Umzimvubu Dam as part of making sure that the people of Eastern Cape has water. The raising of the Tzaneen Dam in Limpopo to make sure the people of Mupani, where they have challenges of water, have water. And also the water pipe going from Nandoni to Giani to make sure the people of Giani and Muyeshe, who have not had water for the longest time, have water. And of that 25 villages, or out of the 38, have already have access to water. And that's the ongoing work we're doing. We have the challenges of the old infrastructure in the metros of Gauteng, Tshwane, Johannesburg, and Ekurhuleni. And the minister and the team are meeting with those metros and Rand Water to say, how do we resolve the infrastructure issues? How do we stop the water losses so that the citizens and residents of Gauteng and the metros can continue to have water continuously? So those are the efforts that are being made to ramp up. So even when if we can all focus on what has gone wrong. But I think for our country, it's important to focus on what is going ahead. And to acknowledge again the contribution of business. We have challenges at the post. Transnet has come out to say 89 containers are stuck at sea. And we've been working with business to resolve that. That's why Transnet has come out and say, when they did the briefing, I think day before yesterday, they've come out and say it will take us until February to resolve the backlog so that everything can flow again. And that's the effort and collaboration that we're making with government. And it took us, it didn't take business to say, no, we're going to help you. It took us to say, and the president to say, look, we need a partnership. Our own capacity may not be sufficient. Our own skills may not be sufficient. How do we work together? And we appreciate that partnership with business.
Yeah. I mean, you call it harping on mistakes, Minister. We call it holding our government accountable, right? I have one more question for you to wrap up just this discussion, and then we'd like you to weigh in, please, on the decision, the motion in Parliament to close the Israeli embassy and to cut diplomatic ties. But first, Minister, I want to ask you about the Reserve Bank insofar as this currency manipulation is concerned. I mean, we know what the Reserve Bank is allowed to do, right? They are a fiduciary and prudential. They've got fiduciary and prudential powers. But should there be a referral as well, an option there for the Reserve Bank insofar as criminal prosecutions is concerned? Or the risk is that the other banks who will be implicated are also just going to be faced with a slap on the wrist?
What is the question on the Reserve Bank?
Should the Reserve Bank, do you think, have powers to pursue criminal processes?
The matter now is with the Competition Commission. The Competition Commission have indicated that they are going to follow the matter up with prosecutions when they've got enough evidence or enough people to testify against this collusion, and they will be the best ones to decide whether they trigger the Reserve Bank or not. I don't like commenting on the Reserve Bank, given the sensitivity that the Reserve Bank must be treated. We must give it its space, and the Minister of Finance, if there's anything that the Reserve Bank has to do in collaboration with the Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition and the Competition Commission, will be best to advise on the next steps. I will not want to venture into commenting on what should the Reserve Bank not do.
And then to the motion in Parliament, overwhelmingly supported to close the Israeli embassy in South Africa and to cut diplomatic ties. The next steps now lie with Cabinet. What would those next steps be?
I'm sure you know of the separation of powers doctrine. So Parliament has expressed a view which provides guidance. Cabinet, as the responsible authority to take those decisions, will have to discuss and weigh its options and decide. And that's where we are. We have not discussed it at Cabinet. The motion was tabled and voted through yesterday, and we'll have to have a discussion in Cabinet in due course, consider all factors and that are at play and that are important, and then we'll make a Cabinet announcement on what is the position and posture of Cabinet.
Khumbudzo Ntshavheni, Minister in the Presidency, thanks very much indeed for joining us this morning.